to order. We'll begin with introductions. I'm Leslie Shockner, Chair of the Budget Committee. We can go around to my right.
Okay. We have a lot of new people this time.
We do.
We've had both the council and staff turnover. So I'm Lisa Beatty. I'm the mayor. I have historically been the vice chair of this budget committee, and I guess that's a question we should talk about as to whether I should continue in that role or not, but okay.
Tessie Nicodemus, City Councilor.
Adam Kostrobody, City Councilor.
Ann Ober, City Manager.
Michael Osborne, Assistant Finance Director.
Toby LaFrance, Finance Director.
David Cheetzazon, Budget Committee member.
John Stahl, Assistant Member, Budget Committee.
Rebecca Stavanger, I use she, her pronouns. I'm a city councilor.
Mary Rose, Citizen Member of the Budget Committee.
Robert Massey, City Council.
Thank you all, and welcome to everyone who's here today, some of whom I haven't worked with before. The first order of business is to review and approve the minutes from the last meeting. Does anyone have any comments or corrections?
If not, I will move to approve the minutes of the November 14th, 2022 Budget Committee meeting.
I second.
It's been moved to approve the minutes from the November 14th, 2022 Budget Committee meeting. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Say nay. The motion carries. At this time, we'll open the meeting to any community members that would like to discuss any city business with the committee. Those wishing to speak who are not at City Hall, please email finance@milwaukeeoregon.gov or raise your hand in Zoom. You can also write a comment in the Zoom chat to indicate that you would like to speak. A comment was received from Elvis Clark, and our new finance director, Toby, will read the comment into the record.
Good evening, Budget Committee. So we did receive a comment from Elvis Clark, which I'll now read into the record. To Budget Committee members, and he lists all the Budget Committee members. The finance report discussion on page 7 concerning the increase in general government operating costs in excess of general government property tax proceeds is not a full and reasonable accounting. What this financial document discussion does not include is the role of Milwaukee's Urban Renewal District in reallocating general government property tax proceeds to the Urban Renewal account. We know that Urban Renewal reallocates a share of general government property tax revenues from the city's general fund to urban renewal funds. We know that this form of review of the urban plan documentation published by the city for the Milwaukie City Council's regular session on August 2, 2016. The amount of money going from the city's general fund property revenues to Milwaukee's Urban Renewal Fund is not immaterial as projected by this August 2, 2016 document. The Clackamas Fire District in its 2022-2023 budget document illustrates its loss of general property tax operating revenues because of the 4 urban renewal districts in its jurisdiction: North Clackamas, Happy Valley, Oregon City, and Milwaukie. It would be more transparent of the quarterly and other financial reports to mention the reallocation of general city operating property tax revenues to the city's urban renewal account, rather than alluding only to property tax limits as a contributing factor to the gap between property tax proceeds and operating costs. Sincerely, Elvis Clark, Ardenwald Neighborhood, Milwaukie, 97222.
Are there any other members of the community that have commented or wish to speak? I guess we have nobody.
There's no emails and there's currently nobody online.
this is something that, are you prepared to address any of this, Toby?
Yes, thank you. So one thing, this is actually a really good opportunity to give a little bit of an urban renewal primer for some of our newer members, how urban renewal works. So urban renewal is something that is approved by the voters of the city of Milwaukie. And it creates funding for infrastructure and other incentives to redevelop areas in and around the downtown for Milwaukie. The way it does this is by freezing assessed values within that area. And so when you receive your property tax bill, you see that your property taxes don't just go to the city of Milwaukie, it goes to several jurisdictions within the area. The fire district is one that Mr. Clark mentions. There's also schools and other districts. So what it does is it freezes the assessed value for the area at the level when the vote happened. And property taxes within the state of Oregon are the assessed value that property taxes are based upon is allowed to grow by 3% per year. And as that growth happens, it creates an increment between the frozen base and the new assessed value. And what urban renewal allows is taking the property taxes on that increment for all the overlapping jurisdictions to go to urban renewal. So not just the city of Milwaukee's, as Mr. Clark points out, this is also impacting the fire district. So that's a little bit about how urban renewal works in terms of how it's funded and how it does mean that property tax growth that happens within the urban renewal district is not something that the city of Tigard sees. We still see the property, excuse me. I knew I was going to do that at some point. Thank you, Mayor Beatty. For those of you who don't know, I worked in the city of Tigard in a similar role for about 13 years. So what it does mean is that on that frozen base, the city of Milwaukie is still receiving property tax revenues. It's just on that increment that the city of Milwaukie does not. So what I would like to do is when we get into the presentation of the quarterly report, I do have some information about what is our current property tax loss due to urban renewal. So when we get to that point, I've got a little bit more information that can further address Mr. Clark's concerns.
Okay. Does anyone have a question on that, or can we just go forward?
I would just say I'm in total agreement with what Elvis is saying. You've made a decision to carve out some property taxes. On the graph here, you could probably have a little bar at the top saying, this is what the public has decided to allocate to urban renewal. It's just the wording makes it sound like, that stuff's just gone.
Actually, I am interested in whether or not the chart aggregates everything or if that little slice is included in it. So maybe that's a discussion we can have when we get to that part. Moving on, we have a city manager update.
Sure. So a couple of things. Number one, tomorrow, we will close on 23 million. So the funding that we did for the transportation bond and for the urban renewal, both of those dollars are coming in. We ended up with a terrific rate. We were sub 4, I believe.
Correct.
Yeah. So
What was it?
sub 4%. And this we did as a loan instead of as a bond because our rate was better and it allowed for more flexibility with the funding long term. So really nice job to the team. I especially want to call out Michael for figuring out how to do this in the middle of all the things and the transitions. So we're almost there. The next piece, the City Hall design is about to begin. So we've been working on the new City Hall for the last couple of years. This building is up for redevelopment. We're in negotiations regarding this building and regarding the move. Our hope is that in September, we are moving into the new facility. And then thank you to Joseph Brulio for both helping get us there with Mandy on our team. She's been pretty incredible at the lift. But for this one in particular, he's negotiating the DDA regarding this facility. And for those of you who haven't heard, it looks like it's going to be largely food space. So food service space for 3 different restaurants. Yeah, we're excited. And on to the next, the parks are still on schedule. So those 3 parks that we're building using ARPA funds are on schedule for construction. We are going after 2 separate grants in addition to the $2.25 million that we received from the state. Metro has some funds available to help with the playground spaces. And what we ended up having left over after we did all the land mass moving was just not sufficient for what we wanted for our neighborhood play spaces. We're going to be doing some additional charrettes with, especially focused on access and ability. So making sure that kids who have harder times accessing playground equipment are in those discussions, or their parents are. We did do 1 focus group with a group of parents already. And then we're doing a second grant application to the state for just additional straight up playground funding. Let's see, any questions? And then, of course, the council is going to be hearing about the parks measure tomorrow night on the study session, and we'll be hearing from them some more direction on whether or not we're proceeding to any sort of ballot measure. Anything else that I missed?
The borrowing you referenced.
Yes.
So is that like a line of credit or?
Do you want to answer, Toby?
So it will operate very much like bonds. We will be reporting it on EMA, which is the federal reporting that where you do bonds. It'll show up in a similar manner in our annual comprehensive financial report. It's just essentially, instead of going out to the market, we instead found a bank that was willing to, we actually did a solicitation of banks. We received 3 bids, and in this case, Webster Bank came in, gave us a great rate, very flexible terms in terms of if we want to do an early prepayment. And so it's just with one going concern as opposed to a general sale to the public.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just have a question, and I'm not sure if this is the place to raise it, but I did read an email from you, Toby, about budget training, and would like to say that I would like to do that. I think that that would be very helpful. And my hope is, since understanding urban renewal issues is something that I've asked about before, that maybe that could be covered in that. So I don't know. My understanding is other people have to go in for the city to pay for it.
Yeah. So since you brought it up, there was an email that came out today, and so the League of Oregon Cities does an excellent budget training. And Chair Schochner, I'm not sure if they cover urban renewal or not. I think it may be even more general than that. It talks about the budget process. I did it many years ago, and roles, responsibilities of the budget officer, of the budget committee, of council, and the type of reporting that needs to be done, that kind of thing. And it's very good training. There is a cost associated. It's not exorbitant. It's, I believe, $365 if we have 6 or more people. And so we could have everybody in this room on that training if they wanted to go. And we have 2 opportunities. There's an evening and an afternoon session. And I did talk with the League of Oregon Cities today. We could split our registration between those 2. So, you know,
So
we still have time to do the registration. We don't all have to commit tonight. You might want to look at your calendars. I believe it's March 7th and 8th. And we'll do another ping on email to see who would like to register and if we have enough people to do so.
Okay. And if it doesn't include urban renewal, can you ask them if they have a presentation on that particular topic as well?
Absolutely, we can ask.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on. Next on the agenda is a PERS update, which will clarify a few items from the council study session on January 10th during the city finances overview discussion. And I'm not sure who's, Michael.
I will speak to that. At the last city council work session, I believe in January, Councilwoman Stevendjord asked the questions, Milwaukee's PERS liability trend for the next few years, and does the city have a policy to allocate a certain amount to that liability? So the city follows the GASB guidelines, which is the Government Accounting Standings Board, which is similar to GAAP. It's the accounting version, or I'm sorry, it's the government version of GAAP. And there's two aspects to that that are important. One is the reporting. We report PERS costs on the city's annual ACFA report. These are reported in the GASB 68 section, which is it's a lot of information and it's very dense. But we go in and put in all of our reporting information from sorry, I'm having a brain freeze there. We're disclosing all of our PERS information and the variance. We kind of look at if rates fell 1% or if they go up 1%, how that would affect the city's expenses and how that affects the city going forward. As of the last audited financial statement as of 6/30/2021, the the employer required contribution for that period was $1.9 million for employer paid. And then there's also, you may have heard about the 6% the last couple of years, which is the IAP, the Individual Account Program, which is also paid by the city, and that's another $566,000. Together in 2021, that came up to about $2.5 million that we paid in previous. So reporting is one aspect, but as of going forward, we look at our rates, and the rates are set by the state. And these amounts are set every 2 years, which the most recent report came out in September of 2022. And they look out for, they do the valuation from 2 years in the past. So they're doing a valuation from 2019, the end of 2019. And they're using those to predict the current rates today in this biennium of fiscal year 22 and 23. And then they also look and they give us a future rate for the next biennium of 24 and 25. And currently, our rates are projected to go up 1% in the next biennium. The current OPSERP, the general employee payroll, is at 16.7%, which is our rate. And for police and fire is at 21%. So as we're looking forward to how we budget, we're looking at those rates and impacting what our future expense is going to be based on that.
Excuse me, when you mentioned the rates of the 16.67, I think it was in the 21, is that just the employer portion or is that inclusive of the 6% employee portion also?
That is just the employer portion.
Okay.
So there is another 6% for the IAP portion.
Thank you.
So I have a quick question, Michael. A couple of years ago, maybe 5 years ago, we took out additional debt to carry. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, in 2005, the city took out a $2.3 million bond, which was to get the city current on PERS liabilities to fund. There was an unfunded liability at the time, and that was to bring the city current. So they went out and did a bond at the time. That bond,
2005, you said?
2005, correct, in the amount of 2.3 million. That bond is coming up for maturity in 2028. So I believe we pay 400,000 roughly a year on that, which we have about 4 years remaining.
And when that's completed, what happens?
I believe that our unfunded liability at that point is caught up, and we're then going on to the current rates that we have. So we'd be caught up and not having any, I want to misspeak. There's still an unfunded liability portion, but our known piece would be caught up.
So that means that the amount that we're putting in annually right now would be available for
For
something.
that 400,000?
Yeah.
Yeah, that 400,000 would be available to cover whatever else is, happening.
Correct.
If the projection, if the rates that are projected go up or whatever.
Correct. We depend on the state to give us the rates for, to give us the rates for what we're projecting out. And theirs is a pool. So they're looking out at everybody and trying to project rates and trends. And
So I think the short answer is that we bought some stability by taking out the bond and by making a guaranteed payment. That the guaranteed payment is now going to be completed, but some cities did not, and some counties did not take out that bond, which means that they're going to continue to have that liability risk, right? Is that correct?
correct.
Okay, so our payments will continue at the 600,000 or whatever it is we make annually.
400.
The 400,000 for 4 years. And then after that, we're just making the payments that we would normally make on our existing.
Right, so briefly, the state provides us with rates that we budget to and we pay.
Right.
In addition to that, there's a bond that we took out. By taking out the bond, Milwaukie was able to fund the liability with the state. So the bond proceeds effectively went to the state, and now we're paying off the bond. So what we were able to do there is take care of that. The state went through a lengthy process statewide to calculate unfunded liabilities by organization, and the amounts that each organization, each city has a slightly different rate based upon how many staff that they have that are still receiving benefits under PERS 1, PERS 2, OPSERP, which is PERS 3. And so for us in general, next biennium, for our people that are in PERS 1, PERS 2, there's going to be a small, about 1% decrease in our rate. Most of our staff is PERS 3 or OPSERP. That's going to have a small, about 1% increase. We don't have the exact calculation of the total. There's going to be a little bit of a wash. I suspect it'll be a small increase overall.
The 400,000, what percentage does that represent? Because I'm thinking if the general is at 16.67 plus 6%, if it goes up by 2028, it goes up by 2%. Does that 400,000 that we're paying out now, will that absorb a couple percent increase? If we continue to budget the 400,000, or then is there a sudden gap? Does that,
Not sure of the question.
The
Well, so the-
400,000 is the bond portion that we're just paying back.
I understand that, but if you look at the percentage of the PERS calculations that would represent, what I'm wondering is, in 2028, we don't all of a sudden necessarily have 400,000 a year more because the PERS rates might go up by then. So if they go up by 2%, and that 400,000 continues to be budgeted for PERS, does that cover it? If it goes up by 4%, does it cover, so what percentage does that 400,000 represent? I understand it's for a separate bond. Does that make more sense?
So I think what you're asking is that 400,000 there's still risk out there. And the risk is our current employees who are not in that original tier one, right? So tier one employees had more risk. It was a richer pool. As we get further out into these less rich pensions, it becomes easier to predict. So does the $400,000 capture our new liabilities that are still out there? And I think the answer is yes. We will look at the budget and see if that 400,000 needs to now be allocated towards existing new costs associated with possibly a higher increase than a 1% increase. But what we're hearing from the state right now is that 1% probably covers it. And there's just not as much liability or risk because we don't have as rich of a pension system. But I'm looking at Toby so he can correct me.
No, you said that correctly.
So I think that we're in good standing, I guess is the short answer. And I really appreciate the financial team who decided to take the bond and the debt in the past.
That was going to be my question, was whether or not it was a good decision, because I was actually on the budget
You did a great job. Well
the
done.
first time when that decision was taken.
Yeah, there was so much risk.
Oh, I know, it was crazy.
Yeah.
It was a very tense discussion.
So the fact that we now just have a less risk, our risk has decreased in terms of the type of pensions we're providing and the type of benefits we're providing our staff. It's just the new people we're bringing in are easier to predict in terms of the cost. And that includes because we're now paying into a guaranteed contribution instead of a guaranteed payout for a portion of the pool. So we know exactly how much we put in, and that's what we're liable to, is whatever that makes in the market, instead of having to come up with an entirely rich system of 2%, I think, was it 2? Well, Mary would know. Is it 2%?
2%.
What was the original tier one?
It was 6 and
It was,
6 and 6 was what it was originally.
So a much richer pool.
Yeah.
I have a really training wheel question. When you say the state is projecting a 1% rate increase, what is that? What's the base amount? I mean,
So,
is that an additive to a total percentage, or is it a dollar amount?
sure. And what we're talking about is with our OpSerps staff. So and that's OpSerps basically pay PERS 3.
Okay.
Right now, we are paying 16.7%. So
What is
they make their
16.7%
salary.
of what?
Yeah, they make their salary.
Okay.
And then we pay to the state for their retirement 16.7% of their salary.
Oh.
So if somebody makes $50,000, then we will be taking roughly 8,000, a little more than that, and sending it to the state. That 16.7 is going to become 17.4. So it's actually less than a 1% increase.
Thank you.
In the next biennium.
And just so everyone knows, I've learned something in this conversation, so I actually appreciate the question. I think it's knowing where our liabilities are as we're going into a budget cycle is really important. So thank you for the question.
I would agree that what it did is it made me dive into, okay, go to PERS, find out where's Milwaukie on the line, and what's the exposure and what's the change, because it isn't a single rate for all cities across the state. It does vary by city.
Smart.
Okay.
Perfect.
Might I assume that the auditors take a good look at this every time they do the books? The unfunded liability?
They are, well, what they're looking at is, are we correctly reporting the unfunded liability? So are we following GAAP? Are we following the GASB 68? And so generally accepted accounting principles and GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board, who set the rules that we have to follow. And are we following those rules? Okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
Thanks, Michael, for getting your arm around it.
So now we will go into the review and discussion of quarterly financial report, and I leave it to our finance pros.
Thank you. And I'm going to bring up maybe a presentation. Generally, what I've tried to do with this presentation is group some like pages and bring about some of the high points. We provide you in the document with a number of pieces of information, and I just wanted to kind of cover a handful of those. And in doing so, please, if there's something that you had a particular question on and I'm not covering it here in this presentation, let me know, and I'll also try and pause between each group of pages. So first off, we do give some of the highlights in the very beginning of the document, and we will be covering several of these highlights. One of the things that you will also see throughout the fund reports is that our investment earnings are above budget. The budget was based upon a 1% return on investment. Currently, our local government investment pool, or we'll call it, you might hear us saying LGIP, because we just love to say things in letters, that's over 3% now. So
that's because the interest rates have gone up.
That's because interest rates have gone up. I mean, treasury bills are above 3% right now.
Right.
So, and that's the most conservative investment out there. So I imagine that the LGIP is going to continue to climb in the foreseeable future. So just wanted to point out some of those highlights. There'll be discussion items as we go along.
So, okay.
Yes, Mayor Beatty.
Well, I don't know if you're going to get to this or not. I was just found it very curious that in a time when gas prices are crazy high, we had a 12% increase in gas tax.
And so that the 12% is on the most recent increase. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually talk a little bit more about gas tax in a larger scale when we get there.
Okay, great.
So Mr. Clark provided his testimony and had to do with property tax and what was on page 7. And part of page 7 is a discussion not just about property tax revenues, but also how expenditures are growing faster than property tax revenues grow. And that's what this graph that's in page 7 is attempting to show. And I'm going to show it in a slightly different way just to give more separation. So the line up at the top are our expenditures growing, and the bars are our property tax revenue. So I just wanted to highlight the property tax revenue since that's part of where his question came in. I want to pay attention to both though. In fiscal year 17, is on the far left side, which is the furthest history on this graph, property taxes were 58% of our expenditures. When we get out to fiscal year 22, it's now less than half. It's 48%. So we have created just in the last 6 years a 10% gap between expenses and revenues. And when I say revenues, property tax revenues, which is the primary revenue source within the general fund. So part of the point of page 7 is to point out that historical difference and a structural imbalance that's created by state law and how property taxes, and as I was talking about earlier, the assessed value that we use for gaining those property taxes can grow by 3%. And the only thing that can make it grow by more than 3% is when we get new construction, and so, or redevelopment. And that's the type of thing that will allow us to grow under current state law by more than 3%. So what I wanted to do is show our urban renewal district is still pretty fresh and pretty new. So the increment hasn't grown that much to date. And what I want to do is show, and I believe, Member Stahl, that you asked for a little bar on top.
Right.
So we now have a little red bar on top of our green bar. And that is the City of Milwaukie property tax that's going to the Urban Renewal District. Now, also the Urban Renewal District is receiving a small sliver from the fire district and from schools and from the community college and from the county. And so that's what makes Urban Renewal powerful for the Milwaukie community, is because it's taking a little bit from all of those places and putting it together so there can be some redevelopment that happens for our community within the downtown and surrounding area. Over time, that little red bar is going to get bigger. And in fiscal year 22, that amount is about $120,000. And would I like to have $120,000 for City of Milwaukie? Absolutely. Is it a significant amount? That's debatable. Relative to the amount of property taxes we get overall, it's still fairly small. What I think is visible with this graph is urban renewal is not the cause of the structural inequities between the growth in expenses and the growth in revenue. And so I think that's an important item. Is it a contributing factor? Yeah, it is, and it will. In that, like I said, that red bar will continue to grow over time. Is it the cause? We would be, if urban renewal didn't exist within the City of Milwaukie, we'd still be having the discussion about that structural inequity. So, a little bit of information for you there. Any questions?
The growth in operating costs far dominates anything that's being siphoned off for urban renewal.
It does.
Yeah.
I have a question. Is the Urban Renewal District created for a specific period of time, after which all of those properties are then valued at whatever they would have been valued over that time period and come back into the city?
So I haven't looked at Milwaukee's plan. So some of them are date certain. Some of them are based upon the maximum indebtedness. So Milwaukie has $92 million of maximum indebtedness, which basically all you can spend urban renewal tax increment, that tax increment portion of urban renewal funds, all you can spend it on is debt. And so part of the bonds, part of the $23 million we're going to be getting tomorrow is going to be for urban renewal projects. And so we will be a portion into that $92 million. Over time, the Urban Renewal District will be able to do more and more debt. And also there is what's called essentially de jure debt, which is debt of the day, and where we essentially are doing projects more on a cash basis, not necessarily having to pay interest on them via bonds. And so over time, we're going to eat into that $92 million. Once we reach it, and that $92 million is paid off, the Urban Renewal District does go away. All of the increment that has been created, and the ultimate goal from a financial standpoint of urban renewal is that there will be more assessed value within the district because of urban renewal than there would have been without. And so all of that assessed value will then come back to the books of Milwaukie and all the overlapping districts. It can take decades for that to happen. And from a community standpoint, there's other benefits for doing urban renewal, but purely from the financial side, there should be more property tax revenues a few decades from now than there would have been without it.
Okay, thank you.
And like it was probably like 5 years ago. It was soon after or around the time we did our urban renewal district. The urban renewal district at Clackamas Town Center was ending. And so then, all those, that didn't impact Milwaukee's budget, but all those districts suddenly got this jump.
So they basically didn't lose as much as they would have if we had been on top of the Clackamas Town Center one, right?
Oh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I follow that. I was just making the point that those districts, I mean, they do come to an end, and some places have renewed them, have, started a new district and sort of continued them. But if that doesn't happen, then they do come to an end, and the taxing, like say the fire district, for example, suddenly the next year has this big jump of all those years that was going into the increment into the urban renewal district. So then the year after it ends, they suddenly have a bigger pot, plus the increased value of whatever was new development in there that gave them.
So urban renewal training is a topic that we're interested in.
Yeah. Well, and I will tell you, if you go look at the, maybe they can send out
The plan?
the plan, which is about a 100-page document. The beginning parts of it talk about how this works and sort of showing the projections for that. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
back to you.
Thank you. Any other questions? So now I'd like to kind of cover pages 8 through 12 of the report. This hits some revenue areas and some other reports. What I want to do is point out with utilities, we have brought our outstanding receivables. So essentially those people that are in arrears, largely due to COVID and the fact that as a city, we were not turning utility customers off for quite a while during the pandemic. We've been able to bring those outstanding receivables down 33% versus the last quarter. And I'd like to have Michael talk a little bit about the county and the city programs that continue to help Milwaukie customers.
So in May of 2022, we began setting up residents with a 2-year payment program to pay off their outstanding debt, which has worked really well. We've also partnered with St. Vincent de Paul to offer assistance. They determine who is eligible, and there's a one-time assistance that residents can go to receive help. But in January, we've come up with, we partnered with Clackamas County that has begun a short-term program where they go through and we send them outstanding resident AR, and they contact the resident, pay off in full their balance, and pay $100 to get them a little bit ahead, which has been a great program. So far in January, we sent in $133,000 in our outstanding over 90-day accounts to them. One particular account that we got a call back on was a lady had an outstanding balance of $4,300, and the county paid all of that plus the $100 to get her ahead. And Joyce tells the story of how grateful this person was for this program. So there's help out there. The nice part about it is we give the information to the county, and the county contacts the people directly, so it doesn't have to go the other way. So we initiate the purpose. This plan goes through September of 2023. I don't know if there'll be additional funds for it or if we'll go past that, but we're hoping that the outstanding AR balance comes way down over the next couple months with this help.
Well, and council got an email from the League of Oregon Cities that there's a bill to add to the pool, right? To add another 15 million or something to the statewide pool for this. And so, there is some hope, I guess, that the legislature will, keep it going longer. And I think, anyway, so.
I guess one of the things I would like to say is that COVID was really hard for everybody. But I think that one of the benefits that occurred for the city of Milwaukie is that we now have partnerships with the entities that can help our citizens without requiring putting on staff in the city who are not trained to do that. So I really feel like Milwaukie made lemonade out of lemons because those kind of relationships will continue for the future and I think make this a stronger city. And I give great credit to our staff, all of you.
I have a
Having
question.
worked in human services, I think that's a big plus.
Just out of curiosity, what's the number of those that apply for help and to those that get the help? Do you know what that ratio is?
I don't, but I can find that out.
High.
Yeah.
So one of the things we've run into that's been a bigger issue is that people don't want to apply. There's some sort of shame or removal from the system by self. And I would say that every staff person I've talked to, when we are asking somebody or encouraging someone, and I'm saying this on air, hoping that somebody also sees this, if we're asking you or encouraging you to apply, you really should. It means there are funds available. No one ever needs to know your name, right? This isn't a public shaming. This is how do we get everybody caught up and how do we support you in sort of restabilizing after a really hard period. So it's been highly successful when people are willing to make that phone call.
Well, what I heard was you give the names and then the county reaches out, right? Because then I think that's more impactful because being poor is a full-time job when you have to fill out application after application,
Yeah, totally.
applying for all this stuff. And so that the county reaches out to these folks is even better because it's removing a barrier for them. I hope they continue it.
And they get back to them. When we send the information to the county usually gets back to them reaches out in a day or two. It's pretty quick.
Wow.
Michael, do you know if there's additional type of outreach for language and accessibility or within households that don't have a great relationship with government? Like what sort of trauma-informed lens is there from the county side?
I don't know the specifics. I do know they have a Spanish-speaking associate that can reach out. I'm not sure if there's out any for other languages, but I can follow up with them and ask.
Okay.
Onward.
Thank you, everybody. So just briefly, franchise fees on page 9. Just want to point out there, because this is going to be an ongoing issue to our revenues, is that there was a case with Comcast, and so you might notice that there's a significant decrease in the telecoms. This is where we've got data transfer over phone lines plus the actual voice on phone lines, and the data transfer part that Comcast has not something that is going to be paying a franchise fee anymore. So, and other telephone companies will continue to do so. It is a significant decrease, and it's one that we expect to be an ongoing hit to general fund revenues.
I'm sorry, what's the difference between the Comcast line item and the telecom line item?
Yep, and Comcast is one of the telecom payers.
Okay.
So for instance, myself, I have Comcast for internet, cable, and phone. I do the bundle, and so phone portion of my bill is still going to be paying a telecom. If I was doing over because it's still a phone bill. If I was doing data over those phone lines with them, that's no longer going to be something that is going to have a franchise fee applied. Does that make sense?
Taking a court case on it.
Yeah, because we also have the Comcast, which is cable,
Got it.
and that part was not part of the legal case.
Well, that business line is just shrinking.
Yeah. So, all right, moving on. Want to talk about staffing? Just point out 7% vacancy rate over the last quarter. Hopefully that will continue to go down as we hire people. I know there's at least one position that was vacant last quarter that's sitting in front of you today. And so, so hopefully that is something we continue to manage. And then finally, citywide fund balances, which can be found on page 12. Those did increase. We've got property tax funds that were collected in the last quarter in our general fund. We have ARPA funds that were collected in our water fund. Both of those are showing a positive fund balance increase. And we do have capital expenditures that happen in transportation. So that's where we're seeing the fund balance decrease kind of offset the overall number.
So I wanted to ask about, you made the point about the 3% cap on how much the assessed value can, and that's always something, that we grapple with. And the League of Oregon Cities is always wanting to, put property tax reform front and center. But we're about to have 500 new apartments, 527 to be exact, this year. Plus, a handful of, we got a report from Joseph Brilio of, 25 or so single family homes. What does that do? Those get to come in at their assessed value will be higher than most of their neighbors' assessed values, right? And so what does that do for our tax base?
So yes and no. So it really depends what neighborhood they're in, unfortunately. What happens is when we have a new home that comes in with a real market value of $450,000, what the county assessor's office does is they look at the ratio of real market value to assessed value within the county. And right now that's actually sitting at, if I remember my numbers correctly, it's about half. And for single family dwellings. And what it means is the assessed value on that single family home would be $225,000, about. And the reason I say it depends upon the neighborhood is because of the way Measure 5 and 50 were set, they just, a little bit of tax history here. They went back to, I believe it was when they implemented, they went back to a year certain. I think it was 1995. Looked at the assessed value at that time, took 90% of it, made that the assessed value for that home, and then it's been allowed to increase by 3% per year. So if you had a house that was built before then, your assessed value was kind of set at that time and has grown by 3% per year if you haven't done any major renovations to that home. They did at that point, they also did assessed values every, not every home got an actual assessment done every year. And so depending on where you were, where your neighborhood was on that schedule, you may have had a recently done assessed value, which might have increased your assessed value by a lot. You might not have. And so there are neighborhoods within any city in the state where you'll go to different neighborhoods, and you'll see very similar homes with different assessed values.
So if I am understanding you, what you're saying is even if a house is built and sold for $450,000, it won't go on the tax roll at that value.
Correct. It'll go at whatever the ratio is countywide.
That's something that ought to be addressed.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I actually thought it went at,
Yeah, I thought so too.
Does it work the same way for large apartment buildings?
Yes, they will take by the classification. What is the ratio? They have large, broad classifications. I don't know them all. There's single family, there is multifamily, there's commercial, and I believe there might be some subcategories within some of those.
And this requires a constitutional change, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
That's.
no.
No, they're
Don't quote me
measures,
on
they're
that.
not constitutional.
So it does something, I believe it's something that the legislature and the governor could put in.
Right. I think it first passed as an initiative, and then the legislature reworked it. But I don't believe it was a constitutional.
Let me verify that for you. And it's something that essentially requires a constitutional change, and we'll find out for you.
I mean, it's interesting because discussions of
You got that?
tax fixes short of overhauling the whole thing have focused on reset at resale. That's been one of the things that you'll hear in lobbying the state, or discussions about ways to increase. But reset at resale, if they're still going to set at 50% of resale, then it doesn't really solve the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
To the original question, Mayor Beatty brought up. So I forget the name of the apartment complex, the one behind the Oak Street, 224 McGrath. Monroe, yeah. So that's, 200 something apartments overall, and they're, it's going to be in the next year or so.
Oh, it's going to be in the next couple months.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
This year, yeah, exactly. Those assessments are going to come in by the county, and, it's a big building. That's going to be a pretty substantial increase in revenues for the city of Milwaukie.
Well, it's going to be taxed at half of the value.
Yeah,
Half, right.
yeah, but I mean,
It is an increase.
it is, but it's 130. I don't know how much it's worth. But anyways, as it gets closer to the time, I'm just thinking about you have one building, we have 230, half the value of that, the 130 units. As those get assessed, will we have a projection of what the increase of those revenues are? Because it seems fairly fixed once the actual county assesses it.
Yeah, so once we get that initial assessment, we will have a good idea.
Okay, gotcha.
And yes, we still absolutely want to encourage development, redevelopment, because it will add to those tax rolls. And if I remember correctly, there's about 3 major developments that are happening, and I believe 2 of them are in our urban renewal district, if I remember my discussion with our community development director correctly. So those will add to the increment that goes to our urban renewal area, and the ones that are outside of the urban renewal district will add to the amount that the city's going to receive.
Oh, okay. So if they're in the urban renewal district, all of their income, because they're in the urban renewal district after the base was frozen.
Correct.
So all of their income goes to the urban renewal and not to the city's budget.
And that's, again, part of the financial power of urban renewal district is that growth, that increment.
Yeah.
So when redevelopment happens,
Yeah.
Which is partially aided by urban renewal
Right.
funds,
Right.
the increment will go back into the urban renewal for further reinvestment.
Okay. And when you say the county takes the price and basically cuts it in half to establish the assessed value, they take the actual sales price?
They establish a real market value
Okay.
for the property. And so I don't know if they take the actual sales price. I just know that they report a real market value.
Okay.
So I know for my own home, I've looked at real market value as the assessor, and then you go on Zillow.
Yeah.
They're different.
Yeah.
And essentially, most of the time, the assessor's office seems to be a little more conservative.
Okay. Well, I mean, I know that's true for existing properties. I've looked at enough of them, but I guess I thought for newly built properties, I was hoping they were taking the actual sales price, but okay.
All right.
Yes.
Can I ask a quick question about?
Absolutely.
I think there's an exception then if the properties are being built on public land. So like Hillside, all of the new development on Hillside won't actually get any additional property tax revenue coming into the city. Is that correct?
I would need to look at that particular development. I know in the past where essentially public lands are going to go to a now private purpose. It does come on to the tax rolls. Do you know, and actually, so I don't know with this particular development, is the city going to continue to own that property?
The county
Or
owns
the
it.
county
owns it.
The county
Yeah,
owns
it's
it?
the housing authority of
So
Clackamas County.
I'm not entirely sure how that would work with the assessor's office since it's now a private purpose. If it stays off of the tax rolls.
Okay. Thanks.
And so, which development is this that you're referencing?
Hillside?
Hillside? So can we look into
Yeah.
that development's gonna be handled?
I mean, and I guess like the inverse would apply to this building, right? Like this building doesn't pay any property taxes, but with the transfer and the development of this building, it'll fall onto the tax rolls, and so we'll be able to see revenue coming in.
Correct. However, we took a building off of the tax rolls.
Wow.
Yes, we did. But we have a big building in a year or two in our industrial. We have 10 acres of the OLCC site that will be being sold by the state and hopefully could come back on the tax rolls.
And per the League of Cities, both 5 and 50 were constitutional amendments.
Okay.
Oh, they were.
Just
Thank you,
for
Council.
those following along at home.
Yes. All right. I'm going to jump to pages 13 through 20. A lot of this has to do with the general fund. And before I jump into this, I just kind of want to cover, for those of you that are new, how to read the fund, individual fund reports. So for each fund, what we've done is we've provided a, how are we doing year to date? How does that compare to some prior years? And one of the things that we also do is we provide what we call the anticipated actuals, which most of the time, if we have an adopted budget, and so in the first one, we give you the adopted biennial budget. So that's the 2-year figure. And we're in the second quarter of the first year of the biennium. So through a biennium, we get 8 quarters. We're in the second one, we're 2/8 or 1/4 of the way through. So for a lot of these things, the anticipated actuals is simply 1/4 of the biennial budget. There's a handful of things where, like property taxes, where we try and anticipate the fact that, well, most of the property taxes come in during the second quarter. So like something like 95% of what we're going to get this fiscal year has already arrived. And so we anticipate that for a handful of things. For the most part, though, what you're going to see is 1/4 of the biennial budget. We then provide how much we actually have this year. And so what is the total biennium to date, which since we're in the first year of the biennium, that's going to be the same number. When we get into the second year of the biennium, we're going to have the year to date, and then you're just going to add it to the first year. So, and then what we do is we say over or under anticipated actuals. So we're comparing how we're doing against that second column, what we anticipate, or the 1/4 of the biennium. And then give you a percent. How are we doing on both a number basis and a percentage basis? So one, I just wanted to cover that. And then the second thing we provide for each fund is quarter to quarter comparison. So what we do is we give you the second quarter. So the very first top thing, if you're looking on page 15, general fund, revenue, property taxes. In fiscal year 20, in 21, and 22, that's an unaudited. So the first 2 years are audited numbers. 22 is our unaudited. By the time you get to the third quarter report, you're going to get an audited there. And then how are we doing so far year to date? And so you can kind of see how we are trending on our various lines there. So what that does is that gives you a for the same time frame in prior years, how are we doing? And you can always look there. And one of the places where that's a good example is in the intergovernmental revenues in our general fund. So those are actually low. If you were to go back to that first schedule, they are behind the 1/4. We have adopted budget of $9.5 million. So a quarter of that would be 2.4, yet we've only actually gotten about $400,000. However, if you look at intergovernmental revenues from prior years, with the exception of fiscal year 22 when we received ARPA funds as intergovernmental revenues, you can see that our almost $400,000 is pretty much in line with prior fiscal years. And so that's really just a matter of timing. And in this case, we haven't received from the county the library distribution. And you'll see that in the third quarter. So I just wanted to provide that as an example. And then also on the revenue side for general fund, also on page 13, just want to point out on the expenditure portion, you get the various departments, how they're doing against budget, how they're doing against the anticipated actuals. And just want to point out that our human resources department and our police budgets, those are budgets that we're currently monitoring because they're almost right on pace or a little bit over. And so we'll be watching that as the biennium continues. Lastly, I want to kind of bounce to pages 18 and 19, which is where we talk about our building fund and our construction excise tax fund. In both cases, we have a lot of building activity that is happening, a lot of building permits that have been pulled, and that has brought our building and construction excise tax revenues up so that at halfway through the year, in both cases, we have about a year's worth of revenue. So that's not something that will necessarily happen every quarter. However, we've had a lot of really good activity in building recently. Before I leave this block, there's two funds I kind of skipped, the City Hall Fund and the Debt Service Fund. City Hall Fund, there's really the discussion there is most of the revenues have been received. Most of the expenditures are about to happen as we do the redevelopment and the move. On the debt service fund, essentially, we're just following our schedule of debt service payments. So there really wasn't much to discuss there for a bullet, but I just wanted to point out that I skipped over them.
So this new debt that's being issued tomorrow will be in here next time.
So it's actually an estimated amount of payments is budgeted. And so that is something that we will, now that we've got actual debt service payments, we will be making those, and our first payment is going to be in June, if I remember correctly.
June 15th.
June 15th. So yeah, we'll have 3 payments in this biennium on that debt.
So that will show up as actual expenditures at that point.
After the fourth quarter, we'll have our first actual expenditure, because June 15th will be our first payment. Okay.
June's not in, oh yeah, right, okay.
So moving along to pages 21 through 34, transportation fund. So I mentioned, and one of the highlights about the gas tax. And what I really wanted to focus on here is sort of a timing issue. And so if you were to simply do the 1 quarter of revenues, we would appear to be behind schedule on our, that's considered an intergovernmental revenue because the state collects it and they disperse it to us. And what happens is while we do receive these revenues on a monthly basis from the state, what actually winds up happening is you go to the pump in July. The gas station then at the end of July has to report to the state in August. The state receives that money in August and they compile their reports and we get the money, our share, in September. So there's always a 2-month delay. And because of accounting rules, the money that the state gives us in July was earned back in the prior fiscal year, back in May. And so we can't, even though they're giving us money in this fiscal year, it doesn't count in this fiscal year, it counts in the prior fiscal year because that's when it was earned. So in the first quarter of this fiscal year, there was 1 month that we could count. In this second quarter, there are 4 months of intergovernmental revenues here, not 6. So there's always gonna be that 2-month lag until you get to the fourth quarter when we're able to, the fourth quarter report is going to show one thing, and when we get to the audited actuals, we'll get that catch up of those last 2 months. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time there. Part of what the highlight was talking about was, and this has been a note that we've been tracking for several quarters because there was a new state or an increase in the state gas tax that took place in January of 2022. We're a year past that now. And so we don't think we need to be tracking that, as it's no longer, I think, a significant increase quarter over quarter. And it's for anybody who's listening, this was based upon a state transportation funding bill, I think from 2017, if I remember correctly, and which had a number of incremental increases in the state gas tax. If the state hits certain thresholds, which last I heard, it appears we will, there will be a last 2% or 2 cent increase that would take place January 1 of 24. So there might be another increase in gas tax revenues happening within this biennium. And so we might choose to track that when the time comes for that piece. With the water fund.
Well, wait, so I had asked earlier about the 12% you showed up front in your highlights on gas tax. So 12% from quarter one. Oh, from quarter one. Well, because quarter one was only 1 month.
Yeah. That's part of it.
Okay.
But it was more than that. That was actually something we dove into this morning, and because I wanted to be able to explain the 12% better, and I realized it got complicated fast. So I think we're going to have to look at that 12% a little bit more.
Okay.
And I don't have a good answer for you tonight, and I'm sorry.
Okay.
What I did want to point out was what I can tell you about is that was just about the 2 cents.
Mm-hmm.
We are all paying 38 cents in state gas tax currently. And so that's when we went from 36 to 38 cents. We're likely to be going to 40 cents. And so it was a kind of big percentage, but on a pretty small number. And when we do get this is part of the discussion this morning, was my understanding is when we do get the reports from the state, we do find out like how much we're getting on each of those increments.
It's a 36 cent tax, not percent tax, right?
Cent, yes,
Cent
thank you.
tax. Okay.
Yes, I thank you for that correction.
I was going to say, that's a pretty high gas tax.
So what I'd like to quickly point out in our water fund, on the revenue side, we do have receipt of ARPA funds, and that accounts for the growth in the fund balance. Also, water fund, wastewater fund, stormwater fund, and the Milwaukie Redevelopment Commission. All of those have projects that are slated for fiscal year 23 that have not started yet. So essentially with a lot of our capital, what happened is in this fiscal year, we were at the end of summer, we wrapped up a lot of our capital projects. And at this point in time, we're doing a lot of the design, a lot of the bid work, so that come spring, we can start spending our capital dollars again. And so right now, it appears that we're behind in those areas in terms of a straight line spending. However, capital doesn't happen in a straight line. And so I just want to point that out.
I didn't recall that we had ARPA money for water. What is the ARPA money for water for?
Stanley.
Stanley Reservoir.
We moved all of our ARPA funds that weren't spent on the emergency management plan update, the after action report, the rent assistance, everything else went to utilities because it was easier for us to manage, and it allowed for us to not increase rates on water for the year.
So along the lines with the capital improvement program, there is additional information in your quarterly report about the CIP and where we're going on that. In addition, we sent out a link. Council got a really good update on January 10th about the progress on the CIP. And instead of rehashing it all here, since half of you've already heard it, we sent out the link so that you can watch that if you would like. And then the last point to put out here is earlier I was talking about building activity, driving our building fee revenue and construction excise tax. Currently, there's what system development charges, so SDCs. And SDCs are something that helps to recover the cost or the impact to our infrastructure of new development. So we've built roads, we've put in pipes that are able to handle a certain amount of capacity. When you put in another house, another apartment, another commercial building, that's going to put more roads, demand more water, put more sewer, change our stormwater, and all of that is then paid at the certificate of occupancy, which is basically the point in time when that building is done. So it's ready for somebody to move in, and we just need to do the final inspection to make sure that all the boxes have been checked. And so currently our system development charges are being paid at that point in time. So that's why we've had a lot of recent people coming in the door to do their building permits. They haven't gotten to that certificate of occupancy yet. So that's why right now our SDC revenues is below projection. Are there any questions on any of those pages? And that basically gets us to the end of the quarterly report. Any additional questions or comments?
I had one question on your footnote number 3 on the Milwaukie Redevelopment Commission.
Okay.
Page 34. So it shows that we haven't spent $875,000 capital outlay. The funds will be expensed over a 3-year period. I believe you want to say funds will be expended, not expensed, because capital outlays don't get expensed.
And yes, and it should probably be over a 2-year. While we might have, while we do have bond proceeds that are in there that will be expended over a 3-year period, this is the biennial budget figure.
Right.
And so, so I think we can clarify that note and make the difference between 3 years worth of bond proceeds and a biennial budget expenditure.
Expenditure versus expense, because when I think expense, I think operating.
Yes, thank you.
Minor issue.
Okay. Are there any other, this has been great in that you've been asking as we've been going along.
I have a quick question. Go back to the general fund page.
Mhm.
And I know I'm a weird accountant. I like to email questions in advance. And I know you emailed back some of them, but I just thought it might be worth just discussing.
Are you on 13 or 15?
Oh, sorry, page 13.
13.
13 and 15.
Okay.
I was just curious so a lot of the expenditures, especially like the management, let me think, what was the other one? Public Works and I think the library were a lot lower. That's all because of staffing. Majority of that is related to staffing.
I did look at, because you asked specifically about the library in your email. And with the library, we did look at the library budget. They have had, and this is where if you go back to page, I believe it's 8, excuse me, no, page 10. Over the last quarter, the library has had 1.6 FTE worth of vacancies off of a budget of 18.3, so almost 10%. So that's going to contribute. That doesn't explain all of it. And the remainder, just kind of doing a quick dive into the budget this morning, we weren't able to find any one significant thing. It's just a little bit of under expenditure kind of across the board.
Sure, okay.
I would also add that in that budget in particular, the retirements and departures that we've had have been of some of our longest standing employees. That means that they were at a significantly higher rate than their replacements were. So even when we filled them, they've been filled at a lower rate than we projected in the budget.
Got it. Thank you.
Lower salary, lower PERS rate.
Correct. Thank you for the clarity. But yeah, we had some longstanding employees who retired.
And as to Public Works Administration, we'd have to look into that. And I don't have a ready answer at this point.
Yeah, that was the one that, because I remember seeing that there isn't a change in employees for that one. Yeah, I was just curious because it's good. I mean, less expense is good. But I was just curious if there was anything in particular for that.
Same thing. It wouldn't have been significant, but we did have a couple of people leave who had been here for a long time.
Gotcha. Tell them congrats. That's great.
We did.
That's great.
Had nice parties.
And my only other question was, and this might be on in that email response you sent, the redevelopment commission stuff was Kelly was in charge, and Kelly has left. She's with.
Don't remind me.
I know.
I'm still in denial.
I'm sad.
I am. She's amazing. But Joseph is taking the urban renewal back. We have not assigned him as the executive director. We'll take that action in the coming weeks. I believe we have to have an urban renewal meeting in March in order to do some expenditures. So that'll be a letter that I send appointing him as executive director, and then he'll be the functioning executive director.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from the committee?
No more questions on the budget. Does anybody have any other item they would like to discuss?
I do have one more.
Oh, you do?
Yes. I think it was a last minute addition to the agenda, which is just a reminder. It is time to recruit for our volunteer committees. And the Budget Committee is one of those very important committees that people can put their name there in the hat. So there's a place on the city's webpage where you can go and if I do believe we've got 3 members of the Budget Committee whose term is up at the end of this calendar year, if I remember correctly. We were looking into it either this calendar year or fiscal year. Can't remember which it was.
I think it's fiscal, but.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. And so I would encourage anybody whose term is up to volunteer again.
I'm not necessarily sure people know when their terms are up. At least I don't.
Oh,
Is it on the?
Yeah, Councilman or Member Stoll, Nance, and Rowe are up on 6:30.
And are any of those people term limited out? Do we know that? I think
we can find out and let you all know.
Okay.
I have.
In addition, there's lots of other, if you have friends and family who want to volunteer for other boards and committees within the city, we recommend, you can tell them what a good time it is and how important it is to give back to your community. And so we recommend that you do so.
Let me tell you about tax increment finance.
Well, and while he's making that pitch, I will add that there's still 1 or 2 days, I think Wednesday is the deadline to apply, to nominate somebody to be Volunteer of the Year. And so if you know somebody that you feel like has given over and above, we're always looking for nominations for Volunteer of the Year.
And you can nominate a number of people. So
Yeah.
Feel free to
Some people,
add a bunch.
you are not limited to just one nomination.
And I would add also, one of the staff was talking about this last week and was concerned that we've had some people who have been nominated in the past and then people don't renominate them. But they were really close to getting it in a previous year, and making sure that you're nominating people forward if they haven't already received it would be really helpful.
Okay. If there's no other business, can I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
There's the motion to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone nay? This meeting is adjourned.
Anyone ever nay?
Desi.